Welcome back to WagerTalk.com. I'm Marco D'Angelo, joined with Ralph Michaels and Bryan Leonard. We're going to talk about some NFL season win totals. We just completed the draft last week. We had a couple books here in town bring out season win totals. We'll talk about some of the movements. But before we do that, I'm going to go to you, Bryan. And whenever you're doing your handicapping and setting up season win totals from what you expect this year, I know you go back and look at last year at some things. Tell our viewers the stuff you look at and how you make your numbers.
The problem most people take a look at, they'll see the team was 7-5 last year. They made a couple of adjustments. They're easily going to win more than that, and you have to go a lot deeper than that. First off, I wouldn't pay much attention to the record last year. I'd pay more attention to the points for, points against, number one. I take a look at what their schedule was last year compared to this year, and don't look at the teams they played, they're upcoming this year, what the team's record was from last year. You got to look at what the season win numbers are from this year. And that's a mistake a lot of people make. But go back and check on turnover, check on why there was turnovers. I'll just use an example of Cleveland Browns. Cleveland Browns they make mistakes constantly with their quarterback in the red zone. Now they've got a quarterback this year who doesn't throw interceptions. That's a huge advantage for a team like that. But you take over yardage differentials from last year. You take a look at the games, 7 points or less, how they did in those kind of games. So there's a lot you look at. Just don't look at the record last year and compare it to the record this year. And for the most part, people overestimate what's going to happen in the draft. You see that they draft some big name player and it's going to all of a sudden make a difference. Going back to the Cleveland Browns, we got a third-string quarterback as the number one draft choice. So it's going to take time for him to get back in the lineup. So don't overreact to the draft.
Just mentioning your Cleveland Browns, and you talked about the turnovers, and that should be a regret. Should regress to the mean.
Major, yeah.
So does that mean the Sharps will be on Cleveland again this year?
I am not going to say the Sharps are going to be on Cleveland. I will say I can guarantee you Cleveland will be a better team this year, basically because of that one position.
Ralph, obviously turnovers from one year to the next. You never can predict for sure what it is, but whenever you see one team that is way off the charts one direction or the other, they might be, minus 15 or plus 15, a big number. That's something you really got to take into consideration when you're looking at the season win totals.
I'm going to just go into a little more detail with what Bryan said. And the NFL is such a league of parity. There's not much difference from top to bottom. And let me give you one example. We're going to talk about yards per game a little bit more. But last year, New England was 13-3, and they finished plus 28 yards per game. Denver was actually better at plus 34 yards per game, and they ended up at 6-11. So you see the difference there. On the stat sheet, Denver's a better team than New England in yards per game. New England obviously had a turnover edge, scored better, had a better YPP, and scored in the red zone. But when I'm doing my win-losses and my turnovers on my charts, basically I take an NFL team, and you want to look at what they did the previous couple years. A red flag is Jacksonville. If a team improves by 7 or more games like Jacksonville did, going from 3 wins to 10 wins, 9 of the 11 teams in the past 12 years that have improved by that much has dropped off the following year by 3.5 wins. That's a down for Jacksonville. Same thing with the negative. If you have a team that consistently wins and has one bad year, you have to upgrade them immediately. Turnovers we talked about. Well, in the NFL, the secret number for turnovers is 12. So you're losing about 0.75 turnovers per game, plus or minus. The teams last year that were plus a lot of turnovers, Baltimore was plus 17, Kansas City was plus 15, and the Chargers were plus 12. Well, if you have 12 or more turnovers, 81% of the time, you're going to have a weaker record. So you put a down arrow by Baltimore, Kansas City, and the Chargers. The teams that had minus 12 or more turnovers, Houston, Oakland, Miami, Denver, and Cleveland had an incredible number at minus 28. So those teams, you put an up arrow. Let's look at yards per game. A team that is 8-8 should finish the season right around 0 yards per game, plus or minus on the year. You're going to have your 5,000 yards plus, you're going to have your 5,000 yards minus, whatever it is. So then you look at a differential. And when you look at a differential and you break it down, about 180 yards in a game get you a win when you break down the end of the season. So let's look at the teams with the biggest differences. Buffalo last year was minus 52 yards per game. That is one of the worst in the league, and that means you should be about minus 5 wins. You should have been about 6-11 if you were Buffalo. Well, they were 9-7, so they are minus 7 net yard per game games. New England was another at minus 7.2. Carolina was minus 5.4. Those are all big down arrows on those 3 teams. The teams that are going up, Cleveland, of course. Cleveland was only minus 19 yards per game. They were middle of the road in the NFL, yet they were 0-16. Houston is a big up team this year. They were only minus 26 yards per game. They finished 4-12, and Denver at 6-11. So when you look at those teams that finished on the bottom, Houston, Denver, and Cleveland, they've improved 78% of the time the next year when you're minus a 4.7 difference or not. Close wins, close losses, like you mentioned, that's another category you want to look at. 7-point differences. Look how many net close wins or close losses you had. Those things tend to even out in an NFL normalcy period. So you take all these categories, you look at injuries. Was Deshaun Watson injured? Yes, he got hurt after 6 games. You look at turnovers, you look at yards per game, you look at yards per point, you look at your schedule. Start putting arrows up and downs on those and check those teams that are multiple categories up or down to move. A couple of them I have here just to give to our viewers. Houston over 8.5. Houston is way up on the turnovers, way up on the yards per game. Denver over 7. Talked about Denver compared to New England. Denver over 7 I have as an over, and Jacksonville under 8.5. So my 3 over-under plays, Houston over, Denver over, and Jacksonville under the total.
Right. I just want to touch on a couple of things that he mentioned. Kansas City was the team. If you go back the last 4 or 5 years, Kansas City's not a team that turns the ball over. Well, what do you know? They don't have that quarterback anymore. Now they have a guy playing the second-year rookie, not a lot of experience. I expect the Kansas City to turn down. And then Buffalo's the same way. Buffalo moved the ball, as you pointed out. They didn't turn the ball over, and that's the reason why they had a better record.
Until they benched Tyrod Taylor.
One game.
Yeah, one game.
Yeah. And they had how many turnovers in that one? Looking at a couple of the big moves from the opening numbers. Westgate here in Las Vegas, the Superbook, most people know them by. They brought their season win totals out on April 29th. Then you have the draft. You have a couple days of public reaction and betting. South Point brought theirs out on Monday, and so obviously you're going to be able to see some adjustments from the weekend and see what's happening going around town. Well, the couple big movers. One was Arizona. Arizona opened up 5.5 wins at the Westgate. A few days later at South Point, they're at 6.5. That's a full game. That's a big move on a season win total. And a lot of people, if you listen to people with the draft experts and stuff, most draft experts liked Denver's draft. But does a draft equate, seeing results immediately? I know that they've sped up the process of seeing these rookies in there, especially with the quarterbacks. We used to never see a quarterback. He'd get drafted and it'd be 2 years before he even got on the field. But they had a big uptick on Arizona. The other one, and I know this one surprises both of you, Buffalo at Westgate opened up at 6.5. It's up to 7.5 at South Point. You guys want to comment on that one?
6.5 was a little bit low, but I think that had to be the only reason it went up, because 7.5 is, to me, a little high.
Well, we're also just talking 2 separate sportsbook guys. One guy might like a team much more than the other. He opens at 7.5. It doesn't mean money moved that total. It just means that Jay over at the Westgate may have a higher thought process of, so until we get 3 or 4 of them out and we see where the line goes, we don't know where the real team is going to be as far as public perception is concerned.
Yeah. Denver is one that only moved a half, but Denver is one that's pretty much a consensus. Everybody loves their draft, and where with Chubb falling to them and everything. Denver went from opened at Westgate at 7, opened at South Point at 7.5. I think that's a team that's going to continue to get a little bit of love.
You know, and Brian mentioned too, when you look at what a team's schedule is, you have to look at where they are forecasted for the year. And let me just give you an example. I said I like Jacksonville under. Well, Jacksonville went 4-2 in the South. Well, I'll tell you what, Deshaun Watson's going to play more than 6 games when he went 3-3 and got injured. Andrew Luck's going to play for Indianapolis this year. They're going to be a much tougher division. I mean, the Jaguars very well could have a losing record in the division. It wouldn't shock anyone this year. So when you're looking at this year's talent, make sure that's how you're analyzing it.
Yeah, when you shoot up as much as Jaguars did and some of these other teams did last year, you're going to be playing the tougher schedule. A lot of people don't pay any attention to that. That schedule is very meaningful.
All right, good stuff, guys. Appreciate you sharing your knowledge with our viewers. And guys, don't forget, you can pick up any play at WagerTalk every Monday for just $9. We do Manic Monday, offer every capper. They can put up any play. It's just $9. If they have a 5% play, it's $9 on Mondays. On Tuesday, an even better deal, but we only offer you one capper on Tuesday. We pick one of the hottest cappers at the site, and we offer his play for $2. You get his best bet that day on $2 Tuesday. It's a great way to introduce yourself to a new capper, or if you're brand new to the site, it's a good way to get your feet wet and check out how we do things at WagerTalk.com. Hey guys, if you like these videos, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and be sure to share it with all your friends. We'll be back with more here at WagerTalk.com.